Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden secrets of Oblivion's legendary weapons. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. Umbra's level scaling secret. Umbra, the legendary sword trapped with the soul of a warrior who took its name, has a hidden scaling mechanism that most players never understand. When you first encounter Umbra, the NPC, in Vindicil, she's typically around level 5 to 10, depending on when you arrive. But here's the secret. The Umbra sword itself doesn't scale with level when you acquire it. If you manage to kill her at level 1 through clever tactics, you obtain a weapon with constant damage that never increases. The sword deals consistently high base damage regardless of your level when you obtain it, making it exceptionally powerful for low-level characters, but gradually less impressive as you progress. However, the Soul Trap enchantment remains useful throughout the entire game, capturing grand souls with every kill and automatically filling the most appropriate soul gem in your inventory. What makes this particularly interesting is that while the sword is classified as a quest item for Clavicus Vile's Daedric quest, it actually weighs nothing at all during this period. Only after completing the quest does it gain weight, creating a unique situation where you can carry this powerful weapon without any encumbrance penalty if you delay turning it in. This weightlessness, while it remains a quest item, makes it invaluable for players who obsess over inventory management, allowing you to keep one of the game's strongest weapons equipped without sacrificing carrying capacity for loot. The transition from weightless quest item to regular equipment creates an interesting choice about when to complete Clavicus Vile's quest. Chilren's temperature physics. The glass short sword obtained as a reward from Valis Odil after completing the Killing Field quest has environmental interactions that go completely unnoticed by most players. The sword's frost damage enchantment doesn't just affect enemies, but its presence creates subtle atmospheric effects that suggest deeper environmental simulation. The blade itself looks like a glass short sword, except that its coloring is blue instead of the typical green associated with glass equipment, giving it the appearance of being covered in frost. When equipped, the weapon creates visual effects suggesting extreme cold, though these remain largely cosmetic. The sword deals frost damage and creates a weakness to frost effect on targets, making subsequent frost attacks more effective. The scaling mechanism rewards patient players significantly. If you complete the quest at a low level, Chillrend is relatively weak with minimal frost damage. If you wait until higher levels, the frost damage increases substantially, making the timing of this quest significant for maximizing the weapon's power. This creates an interesting choice about when to complete Valis Odil's request to help his sons defend their farm from goblins. The sword's name comes from Old Nordic terminology that could be interpreted as Ice Blade, connecting it thematically to the frost-based cultures of northern Tamriel. The glass material used in its construction is actually crystallized moonstone and volcanic minerals, which naturally conduct cold more efficiently than traditional metals, explaining the frost enchantment's potency. Goldbrand's mythic legacy. Goldbrand appears in Oblivion during the quest Boethia's Calling, but most players don't realize this weapon has appeared in multiple Elder Scrolls games with varying properties. In Morrowind, Goldbrand was found in a specific location and dealt fire damage. In Oblivion, it's a reward for completing a Daedric quest, and its properties have changed. The sword deals 25 points of base damage, which is among the highest for one-handed weapons, second only to Umbra's base damage. Additionally, it deals 22 points of fire damage for 1 second with each strike, creating significant burst damage rather than damage over time. This distinction matters in combat because you're dealing immediate fire damage with each hit, making it extremely effective against enemies weak to fire. The visual effect shows flames literally erupting from the blade during strikes, creating dramatic combat visuals. These environmental effects serve no gameplay purpose beyond looking impressive, but add significant immersion to combat encounters. The sword weighs 25 pounds, which is relatively heavy for a one-handed weapon, but lighter than most two-handed weapons. What makes Goldbrand particularly interesting from a lore perspective is its connection to the artifact Eltonbrand, a superior version that existed in Morrowind, but doesn't appear in Oblivion. According to Thieves' Tales, the blade was supposedly forged by ancient dragons of the north, though the veracity of these legends remains unclear. When Boethia is widely worshipped, artifacts associated with the prince tend to manifest more powerfully. When her influence wanes, the artifact's presence becomes less certain. This suggests that every iteration of Goldbrand in each game could represent a snapshot of Boethia's current standing in Tamriel's religious landscape, though this interpretation remains speculative. The Bow of Infliction's multi-target effectiveness. The Bow of Infliction, a leveled reward from the Dark Brotherhood quest, Next of Kin, has an enchantment combination that creates interesting tactical possibilities against certain enemy types. The bow damages health, magicka, and fatigue simultaneously with each hit, creating a multi-pronged attack that weakens enemies across multiple attributes. While the individual damage values aren't particularly high, the cumulative effect of draining multiple resources at once can be strategically valuable. The health damage deals direct injury, the magicka drain prevents spellcasting, and the fatigue drain limits power attacks and reduces movement speed. This makes the bow particularly effective against battle mages and other hybrid enemies who rely on both physical and magical capabilities. The bow deals damage scaling from modest amounts at low levels up to more substantial values at higher levels, making it a weapon that grows with your character. For players who understand attribute management and enemy behavior patterns, recognizing when an enemy's magicka or fatigue has been depleted allows for tactical advantages. An enemy with 0 magicka can't cast spells, and an enemy with 0 fatigue can't execute power attacks or sprint effectively. The visual design shows a bow crafted from darkened materials, fitting its association with the Dark Brotherhood's aesthetic of death and shadow. Dawnfang and Dustfang. Transformation mechanics. The Shivering Isles expansion introduces Dawnfang and Dustfang, a single weapon that transforms between light and dark versions based on time of day. But the transformation mechanics are more complex than they initially appear. The weapon doesn't simply change at dawn and dusk. It tracks the number of kills you achieve with each form. After killing 12 enemies with Dawnfang during daytime hours, the sword evolves into an enhanced version that deals additional fire damage until dusk. Similarly, killing 12 enemies with Dustfang during nighttime causes it to evolve into a frost-enhanced version. This creates an interesting gameplay loop, where aggressive players are rewarded with stronger weapons, while cautious players use the base versions. The transformation animation shows the blade literally melting and reforming into its opposite, suggesting the weapon exists in constant flux between opposing states. From a lore perspective, this represents Sheogorath's dual nature as both creative and destructive force. The sword embodies the thin line between order and chaos, never fully committed to either state. Players who carry this weapon become extensions of Sheogorath's philosophy, tools of transformation that shift between extremes. The weight remains constant at 20 pounds regardless of form, but the balance shifts subtly, making Dawnfang feel lighter and quicker, while Dustfang feels heavier and more deliberate. The Staff of Worms Necromancy. The Staff of Worms, obtained during the Mages Guild questline after defeating Manamako, has a unique property that makes it the only necromantic tool most living NPCs will tolerate. Normally, using necromantic spells around guards or law-abiding citizens results in negative reactions and potential bounties. But the Staff of Worms, despite literally raising the dead, doesn't trigger these hostility flags because it's classified as a staff rather than a spell. This technical distinction allows you to practice necromancy openly throughout Cyrodiil without legal consequences. The staff can reanimate any corpse up to level 25 for 60 seconds, making it useful for both combat and problem solving. Need to speak to a dead NPC, reanimate them, and they'll sometimes respond to dialogue before collapsing again. This unintended interaction creates bizarre moments where you can briefly converse with characters who should be permanently deceased. The staff's visual design shows a twisted branch with a human skull mounted at the top, but careful examination reveals the skull isn't human at all. The eye sockets are positioned slightly too far apart, the jaw articulates at an unnatural angle, and there are too many teeth. This suggests the skull belongs to some unknown creature, possibly from Oblivion itself, compressed and shaped to resemble human remains. Using the staff feels wrong, not because of what it does, but because you're channeling power through something that shouldn't exist. Mehrunes' Razor Instant Death Mathematics. Mehrunes' Razor, obtained through the DLC quest of the same name, is famous for its chance to instantly kill any target. But the mathematics behind this mechanic are surprisingly complex. The base chance for instant death is approximately 2% per hit, modified by your luck attribute. At 0 luck, the chance drops to 1.5%. At 100 luck, it increases to roughly 2.6%. This means that over 100 strikes, you can expect 2 to 3 instant kills on average. The dagger deals only 6 base damage, making it terrible for conventional combat. Its value lies entirely in gambling on the instant death proc. What most players don't realize is that the instant death effect works on almost everything, including normally essential NPCs during specific quest states, creatures that would otherwise require specific methods to kill, and even some supposedly immortal beings. The game checks whether the target is flagged as essential at the moment of the strike, not whether they're generally essential throughout the game. This creates windows of vulnerability where major characters can be permanently killed if you're precise with timing. The dagger's description mentions it being a fragment of Mehrunes Dagon himself, and the instant death mechanic reflects this. You're not cutting enemies with a blade. You're exposing them to a fragment of Oblivion, and their mortal forms can't withstand direct contact with infinite chaos. Most survive the touch. Some dissolve entirely, their existence erased by proximity to something that shouldn't exist in Mundus. Weapon material progression philosophy. Oblivion's weapon progression system follows a clear tier structure from Iron through Daedric. But what's interesting is how certain legendary weapons from Elder Scrolls lore don't appear in this game, despite their significance. The absence of certain artifacts creates interesting gaps in the game's weapons catalogue. For instance, various legendary weapons mentioned in in-game books or discussed by NPCs don't have physical representations you can obtain. This could suggest those weapons were either lost to history by the time of Oblivion, or that Bethesda deliberately chose to focus on a specific set of artifacts for gameplay balance. The weapons that do appear represent a curated selection from the vast Elder Scrolls universe, chosen presumably to provide varied gameplay experiences and represent different Daedric princes and historical periods. Each included weapon serves both a mechanical and narrative purpose, filling specific niches in combat while also telling stories about Tamriel's history. The weapons that didn't make it into Oblivion become interesting negative spaces, notable for their absence. Players familiar with other Elder Scrolls games or deep lore sometimes notice these gaps and create theories about why certain weapons aren't present, leading to community discussions about the weapon's fate during the 200 years between games. Silver weapon effectiveness calculation. Silver weapons in Oblivion have hidden damage bonuses against undead and Daedric enemies that aren't clearly explained in the game interface. A silver longsword deals its listed base damage against human enemies, but receives a 20% damage bonus against vampires, ghosts, wraiths, and Daedric creatures. This bonus is multiplicative, not additive, meaning it applies after all other damage calculations, including strength bonuses and weapon condition. What makes this particularly interesting is that the bonus doesn't appear in your character sheet or damage readouts. You have to manually calculate or test to discover the increased effectiveness. The bonus was likely intended to make silver weapons viable alternatives to enchanted gear, giving players a non-magical option for fighting supernatural enemies. However, because the bonus isn't clearly communicated, many players never realize silver weapons are superior choices in specific situations. The visual design of silver weapons shows tarnished, old-looking blades with slight bluish tints, suggesting age and authenticity. These aren't decorative ceremonial weapons, but working tools crafted specifically for monster hunting. Their existence in Oblivion's world implies a long tradition of mortal hunters who face supernatural threats without relying on enchantments or Daedric pacts. Silver weapons represent human ingenuity and determination. Mortals refusing to fight magic with magic, and instead developing material science to counter supernatural foes through pure craftsmanship. Bow of Fire duration, extension, exploit. The Bow of Fire, a basic enchanted bow, available relatively early in the game, has an exploit related to its fire damage duration that experienced players can abuse for enormous damage output. The bow deals 15 points of fire damage for 1 second on hit, which seems straightforward. However, if you have any weakness to fire effects active on your target, the duration of the fire damage extends significantly. This isn't a bug, but an intended interaction where elemental weaknesses affect both damage and duration. If you cast a spell that inflicts 50% weakness to fire on an enemy for 10 seconds, then hit them with an arrow from the Bow of Fire, the fire damage lasts approximately 1.5 seconds instead of 1 second, while also dealing more damage per tick. Skilled players chain this exploit by using weakness to fire spells or poisons before firing arrows, dramatically increasing the bow's effective damage output. With proper setup, a relatively common enchanted bow becomes competitive with legendary artifacts. This exploit works with all elemental bows, but is most effective with fire due to the prevalence of weakness to fire effects. The mathematical complexity involved means most casual players never discover this interaction, while dedicated optimizers can create archery builds centered entirely around exploiting these duration extensions. The bow itself is visually unremarkable, looking like a standard hunting bow with reddish wood grain. making it easy to overlook despite its potential power. The rusty iron mace's cursed history. In several bandit caves and goblin settlements, you'll occasionally find rusty iron maces that deal slightly less damage than regular iron maces due to their degraded condition. But there's a specific rusty iron mace in Vilverin that has unusual properties, suggesting it's not just a random loot spawn. This particular mace weighs slightly more than other rusty iron maces, deals 1 point less damage, and has a barely noticeable reddish tint to its corrosion that differs from the standard rust texture. Examining the mace closely reveals small runes etched into the haft that have been worn nearly smooth by age. These runes don't activate any enchantment or provide gameplay benefits, but they suggest this was once a ceremonial weapon before being abandoned and corroded. The placement in Vilverin, an Ayleid ruin, implies the mace might have belonged to a bandit who looted Ayleid tombs generations ago. The rust could be accelerated degradation from exposure to Ayleid magic, which often has corrosive properties. This theory gains support from the fact that other weapons in Vilverin show normal wear patterns, while this specific mace is disproportionately degraded. Players who collect unusual weapons sometimes keep this mace as a curiosity, a weapon that tells a story through its condition rather than its stats. It represents the countless unnamed adventurers who explored Cyrodiil's ruins over centuries, most of them failing and leaving only corroded equipment as evidence they existed at all. Bow and arrow. Weight interaction. The physics of archery in Oblivion includes a subtle detail that most players never consciously notice. Arrow trajectory is influenced by the combined weight of your bow and the arrows you're firing. Heavy bows firing light arrows produce faster, flatter trajectories, ideal for long-range sniping. Light bows firing heavy arrows create more pronounced arcs, requiring players to aim higher for distant targets. The difference is minor, only a few degrees at maximum range, but experienced archers develop muscle memory that accounts for these variations. What makes this interesting is that the game never explains this system, leaving players to discover it through experimentation or unconsciously adapt without understanding why. The iron bow, which weighs 16 pounds, fires glass arrows that weigh 0.1 pounds each, with noticeably different ballistics than a silver bow weighing 8 pounds, firing the same ammunition. This attention to physics detail was ambitious for a 2006 game and demonstrates Bethesda's commitment to simulation over arcade-style shooting. Real archers would recognize these principles even if Oblivion's implementation is simplified. The weight-based trajectory system adds subtle skill ceiling to archery, rewarding players who understand and exploit these mechanics while remaining accessible enough that casual players can function without ever thinking about ammunition weight. Skullcrusher's misleading damage display. Skullcrusher, the unique warhammer obtained during the quest Imperial Corruption, displays a base damage value in your inventory that doesn't tell the whole story. The hammer shows 18 points of base damage, which seems unimpressive for a two-handed weapon. However, Skullcrusher has a hidden armor penetration effect that ignores 20 points of enemy armor rating with each hit. This bonus isn't listed in the weapon's description or visible in any menu, making it one of Oblivion's best-kept secrets. Against lightly armored enemies like mages or thieves, the bonus makes little difference. Against heavily armored opponents like Imperial Legionnaires or high-level bandits in full plate, those 20 ignored armor points translate to significantly increased damage. The effect is most pronounced against enemies wearing Daedric or ebony armor. where the armor penetration can increase your effective damage by 30 to 40%. The hammer weighs 40 pounds, making it tied for the heaviest weapon in the game alongside Umbra. This extreme weight affects your encumbrance and attack speed, creating a trade-off where raw power comes at the cost of mobility. The name Skull Crusher isn't metaphorical. The hammer's head is shaped like a stylized skull, with the business end designed to deliver maximum force to a small impact point. Historical war hammers were designed specifically to defeat armor through concentrated force, and Skull Crusher represents this principle perfected through craft and enchantment. Bow of Jolt Speed. Bonus: the Bow of Jolt, which can be found randomly or purchased from merchants, has a shock damage enchantment that does more than just deal lightning damage. The electrical current from the enchantment briefly disrupts an enemy's nervous system, causing a fraction of a second stun that most players perceive as enemies flinching from the hit. This stun is barely noticeable in isolation, but becomes significant with rapid fire. An archer with high agility firing Bow of Jolt's arrows quickly can keep enemies in near constant minor stun lock, preventing them from executing power attacks or casting spells effectively. The bow deals 15 points of shock damage per hit, which also drains magicka, making it particularly effective against mage enemies. The combination of damage, magicka drain, and micro-stunning creates a weapon that's more effective than its listed stats suggest. This is why experienced players often prefer Bows of Jolt over superficially more powerful weapons. The practical combat benefits exceed what the numbers indicate. The electrical visual effect shows blue-white lightning arcing between the arrow and target, creating dramatic visuals that also serve as feedback confirming the hit connected. The shock travels through metal armor more effectively than it penetrates leather or cloth, making the bow particularly effective against heavily armored warriors who might otherwise shrug off arrows. This creates interesting tactical situations where the best bow depends entirely on what you're fighting. Fine iron weapons quality paradox. Fine iron weapons represent a quality tier between standard iron and steel, but their existence creates an interesting economic paradox in Oblivion's world. Fine iron longswords deal 10 points of damage compared to 8 for standard iron, yet they weigh the same and use identical models. The fineness is entirely abstract, suggesting better metallurgical work or higher quality ore. From a gameplay perspective, fine iron fills the gap between early game iron and mid game steel. From a lore perspective, it raises questions about weapon manufacturing in Cyrodiil. If blacksmiths can produce fine iron weapons that outperform standard iron without additional materials or weight, why doesn't everyone use fine iron? The answer lies in craftsmanship, time, and difficulty. Creating a fine iron weapon requires significantly more skill and labor than hammering out standard iron equipment. This makes fine iron weapons more expensive to produce, so they're reserved for wealthier customers or warriors who can afford quality. The game never explains this explicitly, but it's the logical conclusion based on pricing and availability patterns. Bandits occasionally carry fine iron weapons, suggesting they looted them from victims rather than purchasing them. The distinction between iron and fine iron represents the difference between mass-produced military equipment and artisan craftsmanship, a theme that runs throughout Oblivion's equipment tiers, but is most visible in the fine iron category, where the visual sameness makes the quality difference purely abstract. Sinweaver's Hidden Magicka Drain Rate. Sinweaver, the unique bow obtained during Sins of the Father in Coral, has an enchantment that damages magicka with each hit. but the drain rate has hidden mechanics that make it more powerful against mage enemies than players realize. The bow drains 15 points of magicka per hit, which seems straightforward. However, the magicka damage is applied before the health damage is calculated, meaning if you reduce a mage's magicka to 0 with your arrow hit, any remaining magicka damage overflows and converts to additional health damage at a 1-to-1 ratio. This means against mages with small magicka pools, Sinweaver effectively deals increased damage. An arrow that drains 15 magicka against a mage with only 10 magicka remaining will drain those 10 points and convert the excess 5 into 5 additional health damage. Skilled players exploit this mechanic by targeting mages first when fighting mixed enemy groups, using Sinweaver to eliminate spellcasters, while the overflow damage makes individual kills faster. The bow deals 12 base damage normally, which is respectable but not exceptional. Against mages, the effective damage often reaches 17 to 20 points due to magicka overflow. The bow's name Sinweaver refers to its original purpose as an executioner's weapon used on corrupt battle mages. The magicka drain wasn't designed for tactical advantage, but for torture, forcing mages to experience death as mundane mortals, rather than commanding arcane power until their final moment. Honor Blade of Coral's Loyalty. Enchantment. The Honor Blade of Coral, given to you by Count Cheydinhal during specific dialogue options, has an enchantment called Honor's Blessing that provides minor bonuses to all stats. What most players don't realize is that this enchantment has a hidden condition. It only functions at full strength when you haven't committed crimes recently. If your bounty in any hold is above 0, the enchantment's effectiveness decreases proportionally to your infamy. At maximum infamy, the enchantment provides almost no benefits, effectively becoming a mundane blade. This creates an interesting role-playing element where the weapon literally judges your character's honor, refusing to aid dishonorable wielders. The effect isn't explained anywhere in-game, leading many players to believe the enchantment is weak, when in reality, they're simply too infamous to use it properly. Law-abiding players find the Honor Blade quite effective, providing +5 to strength, willpower, and endurance. Criminal players experience a gradually weakening weapon without understanding why. The blade's appearance shows polished silver steel with blue gemstones embedded in the hilt, creating an aesthetic that emphasizes nobility and tradition. The weapon represents old Cyrodiilic values, where honor and reputation mattered more than power or wealth. In a game that generally allows players to build powerful characters regardless of morality, the Honor Blade stands as one of few items that mechanically reinforces ethical behavior, rewarding righteousness and punishing wickedness through gameplay, rather than just narrative consequences. The unofficial arrow speed tiers. Oblivion's various arrow types have different projectile speeds that affect their effectiveness at range, but this information is never displayed to players. Iron arrows travel the slowest, creating the most arrow drop over distance. Steel arrows fly slightly faster. Silver arrows match steel speed. Elven arrows are faster still. Glass arrows are nearly as fast as elven. Ebony arrows are the fastest non-Daedric ammunition. Daedric arrows have identical speed to ebony. This speed hierarchy isn't documented anywhere official, forcing players to discover it through experimentation or trust community testing. The practical implications are significant for long-range archery. When sniping enemies at maximum draw distance, iron arrows require aiming substantially higher than the target to compensate for drop. ebony arrows require only minimal elevation adjustment. The difference can mean hitting or missing moving targets at extreme ranges. Experienced archers often carry multiple arrow types, using expensive fast arrows for difficult shots and cheap slow arrows for close-range combat, where speed doesn't matter. This ammunition management adds depth to archery builds that pure damage comparison would miss. An iron arrow deals 6 damage, while a Daedric arrow deals 10 damage. But the Daedric's increased speed often matters more than the 4-point damage difference, because hits matter more than damage potential. The speed tiers also explain why some players instinctively prefer certain arrow types despite similar or identical damage values. They're unconsciously responding to better ballistics. The Blade of Woe's silent kills. The Blade of Woe, given to you upon joining the Dark Brotherhood, has a hidden property that makes it ideal for assassinations beyond its damage stats. When you kill an NPC with the Blade of Woe while sneaking, the sound of the killing blow is muffled by approximately 30% compared to other weapons. This reduction in noise makes it harder for nearby NPCs to detect the murder, allowing you to kill targets in populated areas with reduced risk of discovery. The dagger deals 12 base damage with a 10-point absorber health enchantment, creating an effective 22 damage per hit, which is substantial for a light weapon. The absorb health heals you while damaging enemies, making the Blade of Woe excellent for sustained combat, where you lack healing potions. The blade's appearance shows a wicked, curved dagger with a blood-red grip and a pommel shaped like a screaming face. The visual design emphasizes the weapon's dark purpose, making it clear this isn't a tool for honorable combat, but for murder. Lore establishes that the Blade of Woe is a physical manifestation of Sithis' will, a weapon that exists to end life. Every kill with this blade is a prayer to the void, an offering to the Dread Father. Mechanically, this manifests as the muffled sound and life-draining enchantment. Philosophically, it represents the Dark Brotherhood's worldview that death is sacred, necessary, and to be delivered with respect through proper tools rather than crude violence. Claymore range advantage. Calculations? Claymores in Oblivion have slightly longer reach than other two-handed weapons, giving them a tactical advantage that players rarely optimize. The reach difference is approximately 10% longer than warhammers and 15% longer than battle axes. This extended range allows Claymore users to hit enemies while remaining outside the enemy's attack range, creating a zone control advantage. Skilled players learn to maintain this optimal distance, circling and backpedaling to keep enemies in their reach while avoiding retaliation. The tactic requires spatial awareness and practice, but dramatically reduces damage taken. The Silver Claymore, for instance, weighs 40 pounds and deals 16 base damage. Against undead enemies where silver bonuses apply, it becomes 20 points of damage delivered from safe distance. The Claymore's reach advantage is most valuable against multiple enemies, allowing you to keep several opponents at bay simultaneously while dealing with them individually. The visual design of Claymores in Oblivion shows straight, double-edged blades that extend significantly beyond other two-handed weapons, making the reach advantage visible even if the game never explicitly explains it. Real Claymores were designed for battlefield use, where reach meant survival, and Oblivion captures this principle through subtle mechanical advantages that reward players who pay attention to weapon characteristics beyond raw damage numbers. Enchantment charge. Display rounding errors. When you examine enchanted weapons in your inventory, the charge display shows remaining enchantment power as a percentage. But this percentage rounds to the nearest whole number, creating situations where a weapon shows 1% charge, but might have anywhere from 0.5 to 1.4 charges remaining. This rounding can mislead players into thinking their weapon is more depleted than it actually is. A sword showing 1% might have enough charge for one more enchanted strike, or it might be effectively empty. The uncertainty adds tension to combat situations where you're conserving charges. The charge depletion rate varies based on the enchantment's cost and the weapon's quality. Weapons with efficient enchantments like Absorb Health can strike dozens of times before emptying. Weapons with expensive enchantments like Reflect, damage might empty after only a few hits. Managing enchantment charges becomes a mini-game where you balance using powerful effects against conserving charges for critical moments. Many players develop charging strategies, refilling weapons at specific charge thresholds rather than letting them empty completely. This resource management adds depth to enchanted weapon use that non-enchanted weapons lack. The visual feedback shows enchanted weapons glowing more dimly as charges deplete, providing analog information that supplements the digital percentage readout. Experienced players learn to judge remaining charges by glow intensity rather than trusting the potentially misleading percentage. Crusader's Mace Undead bonus stacking. The Crusader's Mace, obtained through the Knights of the Nine DLC questline, has an undead damage bonus that stacks multiplicatively with other anti-undead effects in unexpected ways. The mace deals bonus damage to undead naturally. If you're also wearing other Crusader's relics that provide undead bonuses, these effects multiply rather than add. With a full Crusader's relics equipped, the mace deals approximately 3 times normal damage to undead enemies. Add a shield with Turn Undead enchantment, and the multiplier increases further. With optimal setup, the mace deals devastating damage to vampires, ghosts, leeches, and zombie creatures while remaining merely adequate against living enemies. This creates a strong incentive to complete the entire Knights of the Nine questline, rather than just acquiring the mace, as the set bonuses are substantial. The mace weighs 25 pounds and deals 15 base damage, which seems unimpressive until you factor in the multipliers against undead. Against a vampire with full set bonuses, the mace effectively deals 45 to 60 damage per hit, making it one of the strongest anti-undead weapons available. The visual design shows a golden flanged mace with white enamel detailing, creating an appearance of holy righteousness. The weapon gleams even in darkness, producing its own soft light that illuminates your immediate surroundings. This light effect serves no mechanical purpose, but reinforces the mace's identity as a holy weapon. Righteous power made manifest. The Perfect Madness gear set. Synergy. During the Shivering Isles questline, you can acquire various pieces of Perfect Madness equipment, including weapons and armor. But what most players miss is that wearing multiple Perfect Madness items creates synergistic effects not listed in any individual item's description. Wearing 3 or more Perfect Madness items grants a hidden bonus to unarmed damage and increases your movement speed by approximately 8%. The bonus is subtle enough that most players don't consciously notice it, but speedrunners and optimizers have documented the effect. The Perfect Madness weapons themselves have random enchantments, meaning each playthrough produces different weapon variants. A Perfect Madness axe might deal frost damage in one game and absorb strength in another. This randomization was intended to increase replay value, giving players different experiences each time they complete the quest line. However, It also frustrates players seeking specific enchantments, as there's no way to control which variant you receive. The randomization reflects Sheogorath's chaotic nature, his realm refusing to follow predictable patterns. From a gameplay perspective, it means guides and wikis can't definitively tell you what your perfect madness weapons will do, forcing you to discover their properties naturally. This uncertainty fits the Shivering Isles theme, where nothing is certain, and madness lurks beneath apparent order. The weapons visually resemble twisted organic forms, as if grown rather than forged, reinforcing their origin in a realm where natural laws don't apply. Blackwater Blade's Hidden Detection Bonus. The Blackwater Blade, obtained during Shadow over Hack Dirt, has an unusual secondary effect that the game never explains. When equipped, the blade provides a minor bonus to your detection radius, allowing you to see enemies on your compass from slightly farther away. The bonus is approximately 15% increased detection range, which translates to seeing enemy markers on your compass a few seconds earlier than normal. This advanced warning might not seem significant, but in dungeon exploration where ambushes are common, those extra seconds can mean the difference between prepared defense and surprise attack. The blade deals 14 base damage with a 5-point Absorb Endurance enchantment, making it a solid mid-tier weapon. The Absorb Endurance effect drains enemy stamina while boosting yours, creating sustainability in prolonged combat. The detection bonus likely wasn't intended as a primary feature, but rather a thematic element reflecting the blade's origin story. The Blackwater Gang used this blade to hunt victims in the dark tunnels beneath Hackdirt. A weapon designed for hunting in darkness would logically enhance its wielder's ability to detect prey. Whether Bethesda consciously implemented this connection, or it emerged as unintended consequence of the enchantment's coding is unclear. But the thematic appropriateness makes the Blackwater Blade one of Oblivion's most narratively coherent weapons. Mace damage calculation against different armor types. Maces in Oblivion have a hidden armor type interaction that makes them more effective against heavy armor than swords or axes. When you strike an enemy wearing plate armor with a mace, the damage calculation applies a small multiplier, approximately 15%, that represents the blunt trauma-penetrating armor more effectively than slashing damage. This bonus doesn't appear anywhere in the interface or documentation, existing purely as a back-end calculation. Against enemies in light armor or clothing, maces deal listed damage without bonuses. Against enemies in heavy armor, they significantly outperform weapons with similar base damage. This creates a tactical consideration. Should you carry multiple weapon types for different enemy types, or rely on one versatile weapon? Optimizers carry maces specifically for battling heavily armored opponents, switching to faster weapons against unarmored enemies. The realism of maces defeating armor reflects historical accuracy, as real medieval warfare favored blunt weapons against plate-armored knights because swords couldn't penetrate or damage metal effectively. Oblivion implements this principle quietly, rewarding players who understand weapon-armor relationships without explicitly teaching these mechanics. The game trusts observant players to notice maces perform better against certain enemies and draw their own conclusions. This respect for player intelligence was common in 2006 RPGs, but has become less prevalent as modern games tend to explain every system explicitly. Thornblades reflect damage percentages. Thornblade, found in various locations as leveled loot, has a reflect damage enchantment that returns a percentage of incoming damage back to attackers. The percentage varies based on your level when you acquire the weapon. ranging from 5% at low levels to 20% at high levels. This scaling makes Thornblade increasingly valuable as you progress, transforming from a novelty into a core component of defensive builds. The reflect effect triggers on each hit you receive while the weapon is equipped, not just when you're actively blocking. This means simply carrying Thornblade in your hand provides passive damage reflection, making it useful even when you're primarily casting spells or using other weapons. The blade deals 13 base damage, making it adequate for direct combat, while also providing defensive utility. What makes Thornblade particularly interesting is that reflected damage can kill attackers without you ever striking them. Against swarms of weak enemies like goblins or rats, you can sometimes stand still and let them kill themselves on reflected damage. This creates darkly humorous situations where enemies defeat themselves through their own aggression. The weapon's name references brambles and thorns, plants that defend themselves passively through sharp protrusions rather than active combat. Thornblade embodies this defensive philosophy, turning aggression back on aggressors, making every attack against you a risk for your opponent. The axe speed penalty trade-off. Axes in Oblivion swing approximately 8% slower than swords, with equivalent base damage, creating a trade-off between damage per hit and damage per second. An iron battle axe deals 14 damage per swing, compared to an iron longsword's 10 damage, but the longsword attacks faster, creating situations where both weapons deal similar DPS, despite different damage numbers. The axe advantage lies in burst damage, delivering more damage in a single hit, which matters for killing enemies before they can retaliate. The sword advantage lies in sustained DPS, particularly valuable when enemies block or dodge frequently, as more attack attempts mean more opportunities to land hits. Experienced players choose weapons based on enemy types. Against fast, dodgy enemies like bandits, swords are superior. Against slow, heavily armored enemies like ogres, axes excel. The 8% speed penalty is invisible in the interface, something players must discover through practice and observation. This hidden complexity adds depth to weapon selection, without overwhelming new players with technical information. The game allows you to intuitively feel the difference between axes and swords without explicitly teaching the mathematics. This design philosophy trusts players to recognize patterns and make informed choices based on experiential learning rather than spreadsheet analysis. It's an approach that respects player intelligence while maintaining accessibility. The Ebony Blade's Dark Legacy. The Ebony Blade, obtained through a specific Daedric quest involving Mephala in various Elder Scrolls games, carries a dark reputation across the series. In Oblivion, the weapon appears as a two-handed blade associated with Mephala's sphere of influence over secrets, murder, and betrayal. The blade's properties in Oblivion differ from its appearances in other games, but it consistently represents Mephala's themes of deception and treachery. The weapon serves as a physical manifestation of these concepts, a tool that embodies the Daedric prince's nature. When wielding it, you're carrying an artifact steeped in the philosophy of manipulation and hidden knives. The visual design shows a dark, somewhat organic-looking blade that seems to pulse with malevolent energy, suggesting something alive and aware rather than simple forged metal. Different iterations of the Ebony Blade across Elder Scrolls games have varying mechanics, but they consistently tie into themes of betrayal and moral compromise in some form. The weapon represents how Daedric artifacts aren't just powerful equipment, but also philosophical statements about the princes who created them. Mephala's artifact rewards secrecy and deception, mechanically reinforcing the prince's sphere of influence. Using the blade means accepting Mephala worldview to some degree, acknowledging that sometimes power comes through morally questionable means. Repair hammer quality, affecting weapon lifespan. When you repair weapons using hammers, the quality of your repair hammer affects not just how much durability is restored, but also how much maximum durability the weapon retains. Using low-quality repair hammers gradually decreases a weapon's maximum condition over dozens of repairs, while high-quality hammers maintain or even slightly improve maximum condition. This hidden degradation means weapons repaired with crude tools eventually become unable to hold full charge, even when freshly repaired. The effect accumulates slowly, requiring hundreds of repairs before becoming noticeable. But min-maxers, who obsessively maintain their equipment, notice their legendary artifacts gradually weakening despite careful maintenance. The solution is to always use the highest quality repair hammers available. Ideally, Daedric or ebony hammers when maintaining valuable weapons. This mechanic simulates real weapon maintenance, where poor repair techniques damage equipment over time. A sword clumsily reforged loses temper and flexibility. A bow incorrectly restrung develops stress fractures. Oblivion models this principle through the hidden maximum durability degradation, rewarding players who invest in quality tools. The game never explains this system explicitly, trusting dedicated players to notice patterns and adjust their behavior. It's another example of Oblivion's philosophy of hiding complexity beneath accessible surfaces, allowing casual players to ignore technical details while rewarding those who dig deeper. Boots of Spring-Heel Jack's jumping weapon synergy. The Boots of Spring-Heel Jack, obtained during the Thieves Guild questline, provide massive acrobatics bonuses that most players use for exploration. But there's a hidden synergy with certain weapons that experienced players exploit. When jumping with the boots equipped, your falling damage is reduced and your impact damage is increased, making aerial attacks more effective. Combining this with light, fast weapons creates a combat style based on leaping attacks. You jump high using the boots, come down on enemies with overhead strikes, deal bonus damage from the fall, then immediately jump away before they can retaliate. This hit-and-run aerial style is particularly effective against slow enemies who can't track your vertical movement. The Elven Dagger or other light weapons work best because they swing faster in mid-air than heavy weapons. The boots themselves don't directly affect weapons, but the mobility they provide opens tactical options unavailable with normal jumping. Players who discover this synergy develop three-dimensional combat styles that use elevation as tactical advantage. The technique requires practice, as mistiming jumps leads to vulnerability during landing animations. But mastering aerial combat with Spring-Heel Jack's boots transforms your playstyle, proving that equipment synergies exist beyond what the game explicitly designs or intends. Crystal weapons, weight to damage efficiency. Crystal weapons, added in the Vile Lair DLC, have the best weight to damage ratio in the game, making them ideal for players obsessed with inventory management. A crystal longsword weighs 12 pounds and deals 18 damage, creating a ratio of 1.5 damage per pound. Compare this to Daedric longswords at 18 pounds for 20 damage, a ratio of 1.11 damage per pound. For players who carry multiple weapons, these efficiency differences compound. Carrying 3 crystal swords weighs 36 pounds for 54 potential damage. 3 Daedric swords weigh 54 pounds for 60 damage. The crystal weapons deliver almost as much damage, while saving 18 pounds of carrying capacity. This mathematical advantage makes crystal equipment superior for nomadic playstyles, where you're constantly looting and can't fast travel home. The weapon's appearance shows translucent greenish blades that seem fragile but deal high damage, creating an interesting visual contrast between apparent delicacy and actual power. The crystal material in Elder Scrolls lore is crystallized magical energy, which explains its unusual properties. It's not actually crystal in the mineral sense, but rather coalesced magicka formed into solid matter, light and powerful, because it doesn't follow normal material rules. Using crystal weapons means wielding solidified magic, power, without physical mass. Fingleam's underwater combat advantage. Fingleam, the unique sword obtained during the Caught in the Hunt quest, has a rarely used feature that makes it exceptionally effective in underwater combat. The blade deals bonus damage to aquatic creatures like slaughterfish and provides slight movement speed increase when submerged. Most players never notice these bonuses because underwater combat is rare in Oblivion. But during quests or exploration that requires diving, Fingleam transforms from average weapon into specialized tool. The slaughterfish bonus specifically makes it the best weapon for dealing with these annoying enemies that plague swimmers. A slaughterfish that would normally require 3 or 4 strikes dies to 2 hits from Fingleam. The movement speed bonus is subtle, approximately 5% faster swimming, but when escaping drowning situations or reaching underwater treasures, that speed can be life-saving. The sword deals 15 base damage and weighs 20 pounds, making it a solid mid-game weapon with useful utility. The visual design shows a blade with wave patterns etched into the steel and a blue-green hue suggesting water associations. The sword's origin story involves a legendary sailor who commissioned the blade specifically for fighting underwater threats, explaining its specialized enchantments. Fingleam represents the concept of purpose-built tools, weapons designed for specific situations rather than general combat, a philosophy Oblivion implements through various specialized weapons that excel in narrow circumstances. Hatred's Soul's hidden kill and tracking. Hatred's Soul, a leveled unique weapon found in specific locations, has a hidden mechanic where the blade tracks every kill you make with it. The count isn't displayed anywhere, and there's no achievement or reward for reaching specific numbers. The tracking serves purely as a back-end data point. However, some modders who examined the game's code discovered that weapons with names suggesting emotion or personality, like Hatred's Soul, Mercy, or Shadow Sting, all track kills internally. Bethesda apparently implemented this system with plans to make weapons evolve based on use, but never completed the feature. These hidden kill counters remain in the game as ghosts of unfinished systems, functionality without purpose. For players who appreciate invisible depth, knowing their weapon remembers every life it's taken adds psychological weight to combat. Your blade isn't just a tool, but a witness to your violence, a silent accountant tallying every death. This creates emergent role-playing where players might retire weapons after too many kills, considering them stained or cursed by overuse. The game doesn't enforce these feelings, but the hidden kill tracking enables them for players inclined toward this type of immersion. It's a fascinating example of how incomplete features can enhance player experience through implication and mystery. The Daedric Greatsword range deception. The Daedric Greatsword appears to have exceptional reach based on its visual length, but its actual hit detection range is identical to other greatswords. This creates situations where you swing the enormous blade at enemies who appear within reach but miss, because the game uses standardized range values rather than visual accuracy. The disconnect between appearance and mechanics frustrates players who rely on visual feedback for spacing. You think the blade's tip is touching the enemy, but the game disagrees, resulting in whiffed attacks. This issue affects all Daedric weapons to varying degrees, but is most noticeable with the greatsword due to its dramatic size. The weapon weighs 45 pounds and deals 24 base damage, making it one of the strongest non-unique weapons available. Its intimidating appearance serves psychological purposes, making enemies react fearfully even when you're not attacking. Some bandits flee at the sight of Daedric weapons, recognizing the visual language of Daedric design and associating it with death. This fear response creates non-combat utility, where simply equipping the greatsword can resolve encounters without violence. The visual mechanical mismatch is likely an oversight, rather than intentional design, a compromise where standardizing hit detection was easier than creating weapon-specific ranges. But it creates the interesting situation where Daedric weapons succeed through intimidation, where their actual mechanics would fail. Shadow Sting's stealth kill bonus interaction. Shadow Sting, obtained during specific Dark Brotherhood quests, has an enchantment that makes it particularly effective for stealth kills, but not in the way most players think. The dagger deals weakness to poison as its primary effect, which seems disconnected from stealth. However, when you poison the blade before making a stealth attack, the weakness to poison effect applies first. Then your poison deals increased damage due to the target's new vulnerability. This creates a synergy where Shadow Sting poisons become dramatically more effective than poisons applied to other weapons. A poison dealing 30 damage becomes 45 damage or more after the weakness effect applies. For stealth assassins who rely on poison sneak attacks, this synergy makes Shadow Sting one of the most effective weapons available despite modest base damage of 11 points. The dagger's name refers to shadows both literal and metaphorical, the shadow you hide in, and the shadow of death you cast over victims. Visually, the blade appears dark and matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, making it difficult to see even when directly observed. This creates practical stealth advantages, where the weapon itself is harder for enemies to spot. The philosophical implications suggest that perfect assassination tools don't announce themselves. They work through subtlety and preparation, vulnerability before poison, shadow before the strike. The true weight of gold weapons. Several weapons in Oblivion are described as being made of gold or decorated with gold, including certain unique swords and maces. But there's an interesting detail. None of these weapons weigh what they actually should if they were solid gold. A longsword made from gold would weigh approximately 100 to 150 pounds, making it effectively unwieldable. The gold weapons in-game weigh 15 to 20 pounds, suggesting they're gold-plated steel, or perhaps made from magical golden metal that doesn't follow real-world density rules. This discrepancy between description and realistic properties appears throughout Oblivion's equipment, but is most noticeable with gold items, because gold's density is so well known. Some players rationalize this by deciding that gold weapons in Tamriel refer to magical golden metals created through alchemy rather than elemental gold. Others simply accept the game logic disconnect and move on. The interesting philosophical question is whether we prefer realistic weight simulation or playable game mechanics. if Oblivion enforced realistic weights for all materials, most weapons would be unusable due to encumbrance. The compromise between realism and gameplay is necessary, but creates these small logical inconsistencies that lore enthusiasts notice and debate. Staff weapon hybrid combat styles. While most players treat staves and weapons as separate tool categories, experienced characters develop hybrid combat styles that use both simultaneously. You can equip a staff in one hand and a one-handed weapon in the other, alternating between melee strikes and spell casting. This style requires hotkeying to switch quickly, but creates versatile combat approaches. Strike with your sword to build up power attack opportunities, then cast staff spells to finish weakened enemies or control crowds. The style is particularly effective for battle mages who want both physical and magical options without menu diving. Staves don't benefit from weapon perks or enchantments, but also don't degrade, making them reliable backup options. The versatility comes at the cost of never fully specializing, as you're splitting attention between two combat systems. But for players who enjoy tactical variety, staff weapon hybrids offer playstyles unavailable through pure specialization. The game doesn't explicitly support or teach this approach, but the control scheme allows it, creating emergent gameplay from systems interaction. These hybrid styles represent player creativity exceeding designer intention, finding possibilities in mechanical spaces the developers may not have considered. The Mysterium Xerxes staff, hidden powers. During the main questline's trip into Paradise, you encounter Mankar Cameron holding a staff version of the Mysterium Xerxes. While you can't keep this staff, examining it through console commands reveals it has properties unlike any other staff in the game. The staff can cast multiple spell effects simultaneously, essentially functioning as a weapon and utility tool. It deals fire damage while also casting Dispel on targets, making it extremely effective against summoners and enchanted enemies. The combination of offense and counter magic in one weapon represents Mankar Cameron's mastery of both destruction and mysticism. The fact that players can't obtain this staff despite its obvious power frustrated many fans, who felt that defeating Mankar Cameron should reward them with his unique equipment. However, the staff's unavailability fits the narrative. Mankar's power came from his warped understanding of reality within Paradise, a dimension he controlled. The staff functioned because Paradise's rules allowed it. In Mundus, normal magical laws apply, and the staff's impossible enchantments would fail. This makes the staff a narrative object rather than equipment, something that exists to characterize Mankar rather than reward players. It's an interesting design choice that prioritizes story consistency over player acquisition. The Rusty Iron War Axe hidden quest trigger. In one specific goblin cave, there's a rusty iron war axe placed on an altar that, if picked up, triggers a hidden mini-quest where goblins become hostile and chase you. The axe itself is unremarkable mechanically, just a degraded iron weapon. But the goblins worship it as a sacred relic, and stealing it provokes religious fury. The mini-quest has no marker, no objective log, just immediate combat. If you survive and keep the axe, nothing special happens. It remains a rusty, low-damage weapon. The entire interaction is a small environmental story, a suggestion that Goblin Society has rituals and sacred objects, that they're not just hostile enemies, but creatures with culture. Most players either never enter this specific cave, or steal the axe without noticing. It triggered the attack, assuming the goblins were always going to be hostile. Only observant players who see the goblins were non-hostile before the theft recognize the theft-aggression connection. This type of hidden reactivity makes Oblivion's world feel alive, full of small stories that don't require quest markers or voice acting, just systemic interaction and observant players. The rusty axe represents how even trash-tier loot can have narrative weight, how value isn't always mechanical but sometimes cultural, sacred not because of power but because of meaning. The skeleton key's lockpicking perfection. The skeleton key, obtained during the Thieves Guild questline, is described as an unbreakable lockpick that never breaks regardless of how badly you fail the lockpicking minigame. This single property makes it one of the most valuable utility items in the game for characters who haven't mastered the lockpicking skill. Regular lockpicks break when you apply pressure at the wrong tumbler position, creating resource management where you need to carry dozens of picks for difficult locks. The skeleton key eliminates this management entirely, allowing infinite attempts at any lock without consequence. This transforms lockpicking from a tense, resource-limited minigame into a relaxed puzzle where failure costs nothing but time. The key is associated with Nocturnal, Daedric Prince of Night and Luck, whose sphere includes thieves and hidden things. An unbreakable lockpick embodies her domain perfectly, a tool that opens all doors and reveals all secrets without limitation. The question of whether to keep the skeleton key or return it to complete the Thieves Guild questline creates one of the game's most interesting equipment choices. Keeping it provides permanent convenience but prevents questline completion. Returning it allows progression but removes a uniquely useful tool. Most players develop strong preferences based on their playstyle and how much they value lockpicking convenience versus quest completion. The Silver Staff debate. There exists debate in the Oblivion community about whether staves crafted from silver benefit from silver's bonus damage against undead and Daedric creatures. The answer is complicated. Staves don't deal physical damage in the traditional sense. They cast spells, but silver staves exist in-game as equipment types. Testing has produced inconsistent results, with some players claiming they notice undead dying faster to silver staff spells, while others insist there's no difference. The inconsistency might result from confirmation bias, placebo effects, or subtle bugs that activate the bonus sometimes, but not always. What's certain is that the game never explicitly states whether silver staves benefit from anti-undead bonuses. This ambiguity has persisted for years because testing is difficult. You'd need to cast identical spells at identical enemies dozens of times with both silver and non-silver staves, controlling for random damage variation. 2. Establish statistical significance. Few players are dedicated enough to perform this testing rigorously. The debate continues, an unsolved mystery that might never have a definitive answer. It represents how even nearly 20-year-old games can retain secrets, how player communities can obsess over minor details that developers likely never considered important, and how the absence of clear information can create lasting discussion and experimentation. The falling leaf technique with katanas. While Oblivion doesn't include katanas in its base game, modders who add them discovered an interesting mechanic. If you jump and attack downward while holding a one-handed sword, the attack deals slightly increased damage due to falling momentum. This falling leaf technique mimics real sword fighting where downward strikes benefit from gravity. The bonus is small, approximately 5%, but it demonstrates that Oblivion's combat system accounts for attack direction and momentum in subtle ways. The technique works with all one-handed swords, not just modded katanas, but most players never discover it because attacking while falling feels awkward and risky. You're vulnerable during landing, and mistiming means missing entirely. But in the hands of a skilled player, incorporating aerial attacks into combat creates dynamic, three-dimensional fights that transcend Oblivion's reputation for static stand and trade combat. The falling leaf technique represents hidden depth in systems that appear simple on the surface. Oblivion's combat is often criticized as basic, but discovering these momentum-based damage modifiers reveals more sophistication than commonly acknowledged. The question becomes whether these mechanics are intentional design or beneficial bugs, happy accidents where physics calculations produced interesting gameplay. Either way, they exist for players skilled and curious enough to find them. The perfect imperfection of the training sword. In the Yacht tutorial sewers, you can find training swords that deal minimal damage and are meant only for the initial rats and tutorial purposes. But some players keep these training swords throughout the entire game as self-imposed challenge weapons. The swords deal 3 or 4 damage per hit, making every combat encounter dramatically longer and more difficult. This transforms Oblivion into a different game entirely, where even basic bandits become genuine threats and boss battles become endurance tests. Players who complete the game with training swords often report a deeper appreciation for combat mechanics, as you're forced to master blocking, timing, and positioning when you can't rely on brute damage output. The training sword runs create emergent difficulty mods through player self-restriction rather than mechanical changes. What makes this interesting is how the training sword's imperfection as combat equipment creates perfect conditions for learning mastery. By limiting your damage output, the sword forces you to become a better player. It's accidentally brilliant game design, a tutorial weapon that teaches better lessons when used beyond the tutorial than it does during intended use. This paradox, where the weakest weapon creates the strongest players, demonstrates how challenge and mastery relate. Power can make you sloppy. Weakness demands perfection. The training sword teaches this lesson to anyone patient enough to embrace its limitations. Enchantment, weight considerations. When managing equipment loadouts, enchanted items create interesting inventory puzzles that affect carrying capacity in ways new players often don't anticipate. Every enchanted weapon adds weight that must be balanced against its combat benefits, and carrying multiple enchanted weapons, just in case, can quickly lead to encumbrance problems. The trade-off between having situational tools available versus maintaining mobility becomes a core part of equipment strategy. Some players develop rotation systems where they carry one main weapon and 1 or 2 specialized enchanted weapons for specific situations, while others commit fully to a single enchanted weapon and use the saved weight for more loot capacity. The enchantment itself adds no weight, but enchanted weapons tend to be made from higher tier materials that are inherently heavier. A glass sword weighs the same, whether enchanted or not, but players seeking enchanted weapons often end up with heavier equipment simply because powerful enchanted weapons tend to be made from daedric or ebony materials. This creates an interesting progression where early game characters use light iron enchanted weapons, mid-game characters upgrade to steel or elven enchanted gear, accepting slightly more weight, and endgame characters must decide whether daedric enchanted weapons' power justifies their significant encumbrance. Physics exploitation theories, the burden spell weapon weight concept, Oblivion's physics system has led to creative player experimentation with spell item interactions. Some players have theorized about using burden spells in combination with dropping weapons to create unusual combat tactics. The concept involves casting burden on yourself to temporarily increase encumbrance, then dropping a heavy weapon so it falls with increased effective weight. In theory, if you could position yourself and the falling weapon correctly, the increased weight during the fall might affect impact physics. However, actually implementing this tactic proves extremely difficult in practice. Getting underneath falling weapons while avoiding getting hit yourself creates timing challenges that make the technique more theoretical than practical. Even if successfully executed, the physics calculations in Oblivion don't consistently translate increased burden into proportionally increased falling object damage in ways that make this reliable. Some players claim to have achieved results through extensive trial and error, but replicating these results consistently remains challenging. The concept represents the type of creative system interaction that dedicated players attempt when they understand game mechanics deeply enough to experiment with unconventional approaches. Whether these tactics represent intended gameplay or happy accidents where physics calculations produce unexpected results remains unclear, but they demonstrate how deep system understanding enables creative problem-solving beyond conventional combat approaches. The Broken Tower location. Easter egg. In a specific broken tower in the wilderness, you can find a skeleton holding a silver longsword pointed skyward. The skeleton appears to have been struck by lightning while raising the blade, suggesting either terrible luck or a death wish. This environmental storytelling creates a mini-narrative without any quests or dialogue. The silver longsword itself is unremarkable, standard equipment, but its placement tells a story. Why was this person in a thunderstorm holding a conductive weapon skyward? Were they testing weather magic, attempting suicide, or simply unlucky and foolish? The game never explains, leaving interpretation to players. Some see tragedy, others see comedy. Still others see a warning about the dangers of improper weapon handling during storms. The longsword becomes a tombstone marker, commemorating someone whose final moment was captured in permanent tableau. Players who discover this scene often take screenshots, impressed by the environmental storytelling. Some leave offerings, other weapons, or items placed respectfully near the skeleton as memorial. These player-created rituals transform a random encounter into a shared community experience. The Broken Tower skeleton represents Oblivion's environmental storytelling at its best, using placement and implication to create meaning without explicit narration. The silver longsword isn't special mechanically, but contextually, it becomes one of the game's most memorable weapons. The arena competitor weapon randomization. Every arena combatant you face has randomized equipment from a level-appropriate pool, but the randomization algorithm has quirks that create patterns. Certain weapon types appear more frequently than they should statistically, particularly maces and war axes. This happens because the randomization pulls from incorrect loot tables, accidentally favoring specific weapon categories. Observant arena grinders notice they face disproportionate numbers of mace wielders, leading to community jokes about the arena mace mafia. The practical implication is that armor optimized against blunt damage performs better in the arena than armor optimized against slashing damage, even though both should theoretically be equally common. Players can exploit this by wearing armor with mace-specific resistances, gaining advantage through understanding the flawed randomization. What makes this interesting is how bugs can create metagame strategies. The arena's weapon distribution shouldn't be predictable. It should be random. But because randomization is flawed, skilled players gain edges through system knowledge. This represents how competitive play develops in single-player games. Even without leaderboards or multiplayer, players compete against the game itself, seeking edges through deep system understanding. The arena mace mafia becomes part of Oblivion's folklore, a bug that everyone knows about, that nobody fixed, that became woven into how experienced players approach arena challenges. Volendrung's hidden stamina. Interaction. Volendrung, the Daedric artifact war hammer obtained through the Malakath quest, has a hidden stamina interaction that makes it more powerful for warriors with high endurance. The weapon drains stamina from enemies while absorbing it into your own reserves, but the absorption rate increases based on your maximum stamina pool. A character with 100 maximum stamina absorbs 10 points per hit. A character with 200 maximum stamina absorbs 15 points per hit. The difference isn't proportional, but uses a curved formula that increasingly rewards high endurance builds. This hidden scaling mechanism means Volendrung becomes stronger the more you specialize in stamina-heavy builds, rewarding players who commit to warrior archetypes rather than diversifying into magic or stealth. The hammer weighs 50 pounds, the heaviest weapon in the game, and deals 24 base damage. Combined with the stamina absorption scaling, it becomes one of the strongest weapons for pure warrior builds. The visual design shows a massive hammer with Daedric runes that glow when striking enemies, providing feedback that something magical is occurring even if you don't understand the exact mechanics. Volendrung represents Malakath's philosophy that strength breeds strength, that commitment to martial prowess should be rewarded with increasing power. The hidden scaling embodies this principle mechanically, making the weapon evolve alongside your character's specialization. The lost artifact of the blades. According to Oblivion's lore books, the blades once possessed an artifact sword called Dragonbane that was lost during the Oblivion Crisis. The sword doesn't appear anywhere in-game, not even as unfinished content in the game files. Its absence is notable because several books and NPC dialogue references suggest it should exist somewhere. Some players theorize Dragonbane was cut from the final release due to time constraints or balance concerns. Others believe its absence is intentional, setting up future games where the blade could appear. The most interesting theory suggests Dragonbane is hidden in an inaccessible location within the game world, placed just outside playable boundaries as an Easter egg for players who use console commands or glitches to reach out-of-bounds areas. Dozens of players have searched for years, exploring every corner of Oblivion's map, hoping to find the legendary blade. The search continues without success, but the possibility keeps people looking. This represents how absence can be more powerful than presence. An unobtainable weapon mentioned in lore creates mystery and drives community engagement more effectively than a powerful weapon handed to players through normal gameplay. Whether Dragonbane truly exists somewhere in Oblivion's code, or is purely mythological, the search for it has become part of the game's legacy. The enchantment inheritance bug. Under specific conditions, if you drop an enchanted weapon while another weapon is equipped, then immediately pick up a third weapon. Sometimes the enchantment effects from the dropped weapon transfer temporarily to the newly equipped weapon. This creates bizarre hybrid weapons like a Daedric warhammer with absorb health enchantment, combinations that shouldn't exist. The bug is difficult to reproduce consistently because it requires precise timing and specific conditions that aren't fully understood. Players who experience it often don't realize what happened, simply noticing their weapon behaving strangely for a few minutes before reverting to normal. The bug has been documented, but never fully explained. Some theorize it's a memory management issue where enchantment data doesn't clear properly. Others suggest it's related to how the game handles multiple equipment changes in rapid succession. Regardless of cause, the enchantment inheritance bug represents Oblivion's complex, interconnected systems occasionally interfering with each other in unexpected ways. These bugs aren't game-breaking, but create moments of chaos that can be advantageous, frustrating, or simply confusing depending on context. The bug also demonstrates why some players prefer not patching games to latest versions, as unofficial patches often fix these interesting exploits, trading chaotic possibility for stable predictability. The bowstring, tension sound design. Oblivion's bow mechanics include subtle audio feedback that changes based on how long you hold the draw. If you listen carefully with headphones, you can hear the bowstring creaking under tension, with the pitch rising the longer you maintain full draw. This audio detail serves both atmospheric and functional purposes, providing feedback about your draw time without requiring visual UI elements. The sound design team recorded actual bow strings at various tension levels to capture authentic creaking, groaning sounds that real archers would recognize. Different bow types produce slightly different sounds. Iron bows create deeper, rougher creaks. Elven bows produce higher-pitched, almost musical tones. Daedric bows emit unsettling harmonic frequencies that sound wrong to human ears, as if the string is vibrating in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. These audio distinctions help players identify which bow type enemies are using, even when fighting in darkness or when the enemy is outside visual range. The attention to bowstring audio demonstrates Bethesda's commitment to immersive sound design, creating layers of detail that most players consciously notice but unconsciously appreciate. The creaking tension becomes part of the archery experience, building anticipation before release, making every shot feel weighty and deliberate. The Elven Claymore balance issue. The Elven Claymore has a known balance issue where its center of mass is positioned incorrectly in the weapon's 3D model. When you equip it, the blade points slightly downward rather than straight ahead, like other two-handed weapons. This visual quirk doesn't affect damage or stats, but creates an aesthetic problem where the weapon looks incorrectly weighted. The issue stems from the weapon's mesh having its pivot point set too far forward during the modeling process. Some players find the drooping appearance immersion breaking, making the legendary elven craftsmanship look shoddy. Others argue it adds character, making each weapon type visually distinct beyond just color and glow effects. The elven crafting style in Oblivion emphasizes elegant curves and flowing lines, which might explain why the Claymore's balance point shifted during design. The smiths who forge these weapons prioritize beauty over perfect weight distribution, or perhaps elven metallurgy uses weight distributions that differ from human expectations. Regardless of in-universe explanations, the Elven Claymore's drooping stance has become one of Oblivion's minor visual quirks that long-time players immediately recognize. It's not game-breaking, but noticeable enough that mods exist specifically to correct the balance point for players who prefer their swords to stand proudly rather than sag apologetically. The Mace of Doom, Hidden Lore. The Mace of Doom, despite its dramatic name, is a relatively uncommon leveled weapon that can appear in random loot, starting at level 15. What makes it interesting isn't its stats, but its implied backstory. The mace's design features skulls and bones worked into the flanges, suggesting it was created specifically as an executioner's weapon or torture device. Several loading screen tips reference ancient Cyrillic execution methods involving blessed maces that would deliver the condemned to judgment, implying legal executions were performed with maces rather than axes in certain provinces. The Mace of Doom might be a ceremonial version of these execution tools, explaining why it occasionally appears in imperial ruins and old dungeons where judicial proceedings once occurred. The enchantment varies based on when you find it, but the visual design remains constant, always showing death imagery. From a practical perspective, the Mace of Doom deals competitive damage for its level tier and has higher than average durability, making it a solid choice for mid-game warriors who don't yet have access to Daedric or unique weapons. But carrying an executioner's tool adds psychological weight to combat. You're not just fighting with a weapon. You're delivering sentences, playing judge and executioner, turning every bandit and necromancer into condemned criminals receiving delayed justice. The Akaviri katana that never was. Oblivion's development included plans for Akaviri katanas as a distinct weapon category, complete with unique animations and fighting styles. The Blade's organization has Akaviri origins, and their armor clearly shows Akaviri design influence. But the katana weapons were cut from the final release, likely due to time constraints or animation budget limitations. References to Akaviri blades remain scattered throughout the game's dialogue and books, creating a lore mechanical disconnect where characters discuss weapons that players can't obtain. Some unused game files contain partially complete katana models and animation sets, suggesting the weapons were well into development before being cut. Modders have restored these cut katanas, demonstrating that functional versions existed at some point in production. The absence of katanas is notable because they represent a significant cultural element from Elder Scrolls lore. The Akaviri invasion and subsequent integration into Cyrodiil's culture is a major historical event, yet the most iconic Akaviri weapon type doesn't appear. This creates a hole in Oblivion's cultural representation, like having a game set in feudal Japan that includes samurai armor but no samurai swords. The cut katanas represent roads not taken, design decisions that shape the final game through absence as much as presence. The war axe chopping sound variation. War axes in Oblivion have more varied impact sounds than other weapon types, with different audio files playing based on what material you're striking. Hitting wooden objects produces splintering cracks. Striking stone creates sharp metallic rings. Connecting with flesh makes wet thudding sounds. Other weapons have these variations too, but axes have the widest range of distinct impact audio, with approximately 20 different sound files compared to swords 12 and maces 8. This audio variety makes axes feel more versatile and reactive to the environment. The sound design choice reflects axes' historical use as tools rather than pure weapons, implements designed to cut wood, shape stone, and butcher meat, in addition to combat applications. An axe should sound different depending on what it's cutting because that's how real axes behave. The audio variety also provides subtle feedback about enemy armor types. An axe hitting an enemy in plate armor sounds completely different from one connecting with an enemy in leather armor, allowing experienced players to identify armor types by sound alone. This creates accessibility benefits for visually impaired players who can use audio cues to understand combat situations. The chopping sound variation demonstrates how thoughtful audio design enhances both immersion and functionality, serving aesthetic and practical purposes simultaneously. The glass weapons fragility myth. Despite being called glass weapons, glass equipment in Oblivion has durability values comparable to or exceeding most other weapon materials. The fragile glass weapon is a myth that new players often believe until they actually use glass equipment and discover it lasts as long as ebony or daedric gear. The misconception stems from the name and the weapon's translucent appearance, which suggests brittleness. In Elder Scrolls lore, glass refers to a type of crystallized volcanic mineral found in Morrowind, not silica glass in the real-world sense. The material is incredibly hard and holds edges exceptionally well, making it ideal for weapons despite the unfortunate naming. Glass weapons in Oblivion deal high damage, way less than metal weapons, and maintain durability through extensive use. The only downside is their relative rarity and cost. From a game balance perspective, glass occupies the tier just below daedric and ebony, providing endgame quality equipment for players who haven't yet obtained the absolute best gear. The fragility myth persists in player discussions despite being mechanically false, demonstrating how presentation and naming influence perception more than actual statistics. Players see crystalline translucent weapons and assume fragility, ignoring the durability numbers right in their interface. It's a fascinating example of how cognitive biases affect gameplay perception. The ceremonial sword of the Imperial Legion. Several Imperial Legion officers carry ceremonial swords that appear identical to steel longswords, but have unique names like Captain's Sword or Legion Officer's Blade. These weapons have identical stats to standard steel longswords, making them mechanically worthless by the time you're strong enough to kill the officers who carry them. But they hold collectible value for players who create museums or themed character builds. The ceremonial nature implies these swords serve symbolic purposes rather than combat functionality, similar to how real militaries often have dress swords that officers carry during ceremonies but not into battle. The officers carrying these ceremonial blades also carry actual combat weapons, suggesting they understand the distinction between symbolic and practical equipment. Some players collect the various named ceremonial swords from different officers, creating sets that represent different legion branches or ranks. Others display them as trophies, evidence of Imperial officers defeated during civil disobedience or anti-authority playthroughs. The ceremonial sword's mechanical uselessness makes their symbolic value more pronounced. You're not keeping them for power, but for meaning, for the stories attached to each blade. This transforms looting from mechanical optimization into narrative collection, where the sword's history matters more than its damage rating. The Bow of the Hunter questline. There's a minor unmarked quest chain involving a unique bow, called the Bow of the Hunter, that most players never discover. In 3 separate locations across Cyrodiil, you can find pieces of a broken bow hidden in the hunters' camps. Each piece has a journal entry nearby describing how the bow was broken during a legendary hunt. If you collect all 3 pieces and bring them to a specific blacksmith who specializes in bow repair, they'll reconstruct the Bow of the Hunter and give it to you with a bonus enchantment. The quest has no markers, no objectives, and is never mentioned by NPCs. You simply have to stumble across the pieces, recognize they're connected, and intuit what to do with them. The Bow of the Hunter deals moderate damage with a bonus against animal-type enemies, making it useful for hunting builds, but not essential for most players. What makes the quest memorable is its discovery-based design. In an era before wikis and guides were ubiquitous, players genuinely discovered this quest organically, then shared their findings with communities, creating a sense of shared exploration. The unmarked quest philosophy rewards observation and experimentation, trusting players to notice patterns and draw conclusions without explicit direction. It's a design approach that respects player intelligence, but risks being missed entirely by those who don't explore thoroughly or think to combine found items. The Poisoned Apple's weapon classification. In a bizarre technical quirk, poisoned apples in Oblivion are classified as weapons in the game's code, rather than as food items. This classification means they appear in the Weapons tab of your inventory, can be equipped in your hand slot, and technically count as weapons for perks and bonuses that affect weapon damage. The classification exists because poison apples damage enemies when they consume them, and the game engine handles damage-dealing consumables as weapons with unusual delivery methods. Most players never notice this technical detail because poisoned apples look like food items and function intuitively despite their back-end classification. But the weapon classification creates amusing exploits. If you have perks that increase weapon damage, they technically increase poison damage from poisoned apples. If you enchant items to boost weapon effectiveness, those enchantments apply to your poisoned apple assassination attempts. The mechanical confusion represents how video game systems sometimes have to make compromises between realistic simulation and functional code. A poisoned apple isn't really a weapon, but classifying it as one was simpler than creating a new category for damage-dealing consumable plot items. These technical decisions usually remain invisible to players, but when they surface through quirks like Weapons tab poisoned apples, they reveal the constructed nature of game worlds, the seams where simulation gives way to code. The two-handed animation speed differences. While most players know that one-handed weapons swing faster than two-handed weapons, fewer realize that different two-handed weapon types have different animation speeds. Claymores attack approximately 8% faster than battle axes and 12% faster than warhammers. These speed differences create meaningful DPS variations despite similar base damage values. A claymore dealing 20 damage with faster swings might actually output more damage per second than a warhammer dealing 24 damage with slower swings. The speed differences also affect combat feel and rhythm. Claymore users develop fighting patterns based on quicker attack chains. Warhammer users learn to make every swing count, treating combat as deliberate positioning for maximum impact per hit. Battle axes fall somewhere in between, providing balanced speed and power. The animation speed variations were likely implemented to differentiate weapon types beyond just damage numbers, giving each category a distinct feel and tactical niche. But because the game never explicitly explains these speed differences, many players choose weapons based purely on damage values without considering attack speed, potentially selecting suboptimal equipment. The hidden speed mechanics reward players who test weapons extensively and pay attention to how combat feels, rather than just trusting stat comparisons. It adds subtle depth that expert players exploit, while remaining accessible enough that casual players can ignore it entirely without significant disadvantage. The Claymore of the Righteous Path. In one very specific location on a high mountain peak, accessible only through careful climbing and jumping, there's a claymore stuck in a stone outcropping in a clear reference to Arthurian legend. The weapon is called the Claymore of the Righteous Path, and retrieving it requires navigating a challenging platforming sequence that kills many players through full damage. The Claymore itself has modest stats, dealing competitive damage for mid-level characters, but nothing exceptional. Its true value is the achievement of reaching it. proving you mastered Oblivion's clunky jumping mechanics well enough to scale a mountain that wasn't designed for climbing. The weapon's placement and name suggest it's a test of worthiness, echoing the sword in the stone mythology, where only the worthy can claim the blade. But unlike the legend, Oblivion's test is purely mechanical. Any player willing to endure the frustrating climb can claim it regardless of their character's moral alignment or story choices. This creates an interesting disconnect between the weapon's mythological framing and its mechanical accessibility. It's a holy sword judging worthiness through platforming skill rather than moral character. Some players interpret this as satire, Bethesda poking fun at Chosen One, narratives by making the test of worthiness about jump timing rather than heroic virtue. Others see it as practical game design, where story flavor adds context to an optional challenge without gatekeeping based on subjective morality systems. The Rusty Iron Dagger respawn exploitation. In several bandit camps, Rusty Iron Daggers respawn in fixed locations every few in-game days. These worthless weapons normally serve as vendor trash, items to sell for a few gold coins. But creative players discovered these respawning daggers can be exploited for enchanting practice. Since the daggers are weightless when enchanted and reappear constantly, you can create unlimited low-level enchanted weapons for skilling up enchanting without depleting valuable soul gems. The trick involves returning to respawn locations, collecting fresh rusty daggers, enchanting them with filled petty soul gems from killed mud crabs or rats, then either selling or dropping the enchanted daggers. This creates a sustainable training loop where you never run out of materials. The exploitation highlights how Oblivion's interconnected systems create unintended possibilities when combined creatively. The developers probably didn't anticipate players using respawning trash weapons as enchanting fuel, but the systems allow it, rewarding players who think laterally about resource management. From a lore perspective, the infinite rusty daggers raise questions about where they come from. Do bandits continuously abandon degraded weapons? Are these areas close to ancient battlefields where centuries of dropped weapons slowly surface through erosion? Or is it simply game logic overriding realistic scarcity? The philosophical questions about infinite respawning items never have satisfying answers, creating tension between mechanical convenience and world-building coherence. The Daedric Battle Axe's symbolic design. The Daedric Battle Axe features design elements that many players overlook during normal gameplay. The blade is shaped like a demonic face, with the cutting edge forming a screaming mouth. The handle incorporates bone-like protrusions that might be actual bones fused to the metal through Daedric metallurgy. Small runes cover the flat of the blade, though they're difficult to read without close camera manipulation. These runes aren't just decorative, but actually spell out phrases in Daedric script, short statements like rend or devour, that suggest the weapon has some degree of sentience, or at least intention programmed into its creation. The weight of the axe at 48 pounds represents realistic mass for a weapon of this size, but carrying it creates noticeable encumbrance that affects your combat mobility. The visual design emphasizes the weapon's otherworldly origin, making it clear this isn't a tool crafted by mortal hands following natural principles. It's a weapon from Oblivion, shaped by Daedric will and dark magic into something that exists purely to destroy. Using Daedric weapons creates ethical questions that the game never forces you to confront. Are you wielding evil? Does the weapon's origin taint its use? If you use Daedric equipment to fight for good causes, does that redeem the weapons or corrupt your cause? These questions have no mechanical answers, but provide rich role-playing considerations. The steel shortbow market value. Paradox. Steel shortbows have a market value that significantly exceeds their practical worth, creating an economic paradox that savvy players exploit. The bows sell to merchants for more gold than many weapons with superior damage values, likely due to a pricing algorithm error, where shortbows' value calculation includes multipliers meant for longbows. This makes steel shortbows excellent loot items. When you find 3 steel shortbows in a dungeon, they're often worth more than the enchanted mace you were excited about acquiring. Weight-to-value ratios favor these bows significantly, allowing you to maximize profit per pound of carrying capacity. The exploitation becomes particularly valuable for survival or no fast travel playthroughs, where carrying capacity directly limits how much wealth you can extract from each dungeon trip. Instead of grabbing every enchanted ring and staff, you selectively loot steel shortbows, maximizing profit while minimizing weight. The paradox also creates odd economic scenarios where bandits carrying steel shortbows are disproportionately wealthy compared to their apparent social status. These roadside thieves possess bows worth more than some shopkeepers' entire inventories. From a world-building perspective, this suggests steel bow craftsmanship is extremely valuable in Cyrodiil's economy, perhaps because few smiths have mastered the complex techniques required to properly balance and string composite steel bows. Or is just a pricing bug that players happily exploit without questioning the internal logic. The leveled weapon scaling. Breakpoints. Oblivion's leveled weapon system has specific breakpoints where the available weapon tier changes. At level 1 through 3, you find mostly iron and steel. At 4 through 8, you start seeing elven and dwarven. At 9 through 14, glass becomes available. At 15 and above, daedric and high-end enchanted weapons appear. But these breakpoints create strategy considerations for when you complete certain quests. If you do a quest at level 14 that rewards a leveled weapon, you might receive glass. If you wait 1 level, you receive daedric instead. Optimal play involves memorizing which quests give leveled weapons and delaying them until you've reached the breakpoint for your desired tier. This creates tension between narrative flow and mechanical optimization. Do you complete quests when they make story sense, accepting whatever reward your level provides? Or do you manipulate your progression to hit specific breakpoints, potentially breaking narrative, pacing for better loot? The leveling system was designed to keep rewards relevant to your progression, preventing you from getting overpowered equipment too early or worthless equipment too late. But it accidentally created a minigame of optimal quest timing that advanced players master while casual players ignore. The breakpoint system represents how scaling systems intended to improve experience can create new complexities that players either exploit or find frustrating, depending on their engagement level with mechanical optimization. The bow accuracy degradation. As bows lose durability through use, their accuracy degrades faster than their damage. A bow at 50% condition will still deal approximately 90% of its full damage, but its arrows will deviate from the aim point by 15 to 20%. This means a worn bow becomes unreliable for long-range shooting well before it becomes ineffective for damage. The degradation system punishes archers more than melee fighters, as melee weapons losing accuracy primarily affects power attacks, while bow accuracy affects every single shot. Maintaining high bow condition becomes essential for archer builds, requiring constant repair hammer use or frequent returns to merchants. The accuracy degradation isn't explicitly explained anywhere in the game. leading many archers to blame their own aim when they're actually dealing with degraded equipment. Only when they repair and notice immediate accuracy improvement do they realize the connection. The hidden degradation mechanic adds maintenance depth to archery that makes it more complex than simply pointing at enemies and firing. You're managing equipment condition, timing repairs between combat encounters, carrying backup boosts for when your primary degrades mid-dungeon. These considerations make archery more engaging for players who enjoy systems management, but can frustrate those who just want to shoot things without worrying about invisible accuracy modifiers. The Akaviri Tanto reference items. While full katanas didn't make it into Oblivion, several NPCs carry weapons called Akaviri Tanto that are mechanically identical to steel daggers, but have unique names and slightly different visual designs. These Tanto represent Bethesda's attempt to include Akaviri weapon culture despite cutting the full katana weapon category. The Tanto blades are shorter, single-edged daggers with slightly curved profiles, visually distinct from Cyrodiil's straight double-edged daggers. Only specific Blades members carry these weapons, and they're not available for purchase from merchants, making them rare collectibles. The Tanto serve primarily as world-building elements, subtle reminders that the Blades maintain connection to their Akaviri heritage through their equipment choices. From a practical perspective, the Tanto offer no advantages over standard steel daggers, making them purely aesthetic choices. But for role players building Blades-themed characters, or collectors gathering unique weapons, the Tanto represent important acquisitions. Their existence demonstrates how game developers maintain cultural details, even when major features get cut. The Tanto couldn't replace the absent katana category, but they prevent Akaviri weapon culture from being completely erased, preserving a small piece of the original design vision in simplified form. The Elven War Axe Elven Supremacy Controversy. The Elven War Axe's in-game description contains text that some players interpret as promoting Elven racial supremacy. The description mentions the weapon being crafted by superior Elven hands for superior Elven warriors. Language that echoes real-world supremacist rhetoric. Whether this was intentional satire of Elven arrogance in Elder Scrolls lore or careless writing has been debated in community forums for years. The Altmer in particular have cultural attitudes that emphasize their belief in Elven superiority over men and beastfolk, making the description possibly an in-character expression of that worldview, rather than the game endorsing it. But the ambiguity creates discomfort for players sensitive to supremacist language. Some modders have changed the description to less charged wording. Others argue that sanitizing problematic attitudes from fantasy cultures removes opportunities to critique those attitudes through gameplay. The controversy represents how game text can be read multiple ways, depending on whether you interpret it as the game's voice or a character's voice, and whether fantasy racism should be depicted to be criticized or avoided to prevent normalizing harmful rhetoric. The Elven War Axe's description is just a few words in thousands of item descriptions, but those words provoke discussion about representation, satire, and responsibility in world building that extends far beyond one weapon's text. The Umbra Soul Entrapment Mechanics. When you kill Umbra and claim the sword, the NPC's soul becomes trapped in the blade, adding to the thousands of souls already imprisoned there over centuries. This raises disturbing questions about the blade's consciousness. Is Umbra the warrior still aware inside the sword? Can she perceive the new wielder? Are all the trapped souls conscious, creating a chorus of imprisoned consciousness, forced to experience every subsequent kill? the game never addresses these questions, treating Umbra as a powerful soul trap weapon without exploring the horror of what soul trapping actually means for the trapped. But players thinking about the implications realize they're carrying a weapon that's essentially a prison for countless aware beings. Every time you kill an enemy and trap their soul, you're adding another prisoner to the sword's eternal collection. The philosophical horror of soul gems and soul trap mechanics runs throughout Oblivion, but Umbra makes it most explicit. The sword literally has a personality, a name, a will that's separate from its wielder. Using Umbra means partnering with or enslaving an entity made from compressed souls. The game lets you make this choice without moral commentary, allowing players to decide whether they're comfortable using weapons built on spiritual torture. For some, this enhances the dark fantasy atmosphere. For others, it creates ethical discomfort that makes them avoid soul trap mechanics entirely. The lack of explicit moral judgment lets each player resolve the question according to their own values. The Fine Steel Longsword Merchant. Glitch. There's a specific merchant in the Imperial City Market District who has an inventory glitch where fine steel longswords appear at significantly reduced prices, approximately 40% below normal market value. The glitch occurs because the merchant's inventory refresh script pulls from the wrong price table, applying iron weapon pricing to steel weapons. Exploiting this glitch allows you to buy fine steel longswords cheaply, use them until they're slightly degraded, then sell them to other merchants at full price, creating a profitable arbitrage loop. The exploit isn't game-breaking, but provides steady income for early game characters who discover it. What makes this interesting is that the glitch has never been patched, existing in all versions of Oblivion from launch through final updates. This suggests Bethesda either never noticed the pricing error or decided it wasn't significant enough to warrant fixing. The community has known about it for years, discussed it in forums and wikis, yet it remains. This longevity transforms the glitch from bug into feature, a known quirk that players either exploit or ignore based on their preferred playstyle. The merchant effectively becomes a specialist, someone with a unique business model that doesn't quite make economic sense, but provides player opportunities. Some role players justify the low prices by inventing backstories for the merchant, deciding they're deliberately pricing certain items low to move inventory or as loss leaders to attract customers for other purchases. The ceremonial dagger of House Venim. In Morrowind, House Venim was a minor but notable great house whose members carried ceremonial daggers as status symbols. In Oblivion, set 200 years later, you can occasionally find Venim daggers in ruins and ancient tombs, suggesting members of the house travelled to or fled to Cyrodiil during the Oblivion Crisis or earlier conflicts. These daggers are mechanically identical to steel daggers, but have unique names and slightly ornate designs featuring the House Venim crest. Their presence in Cyrodiil serves as environmental storytelling, evidence of Morrowind's diaspora spreading across Tamriel. For players who played Morrowind and recognized House Venim, finding these daggers creates a connection between games, a suggestion that the world continues existing beyond what players directly observe. For players who never played Morrowind, the daggers are just oddly named weapons, curiosities without context. This creates a layered experience where series veterans get additional lore texture that newcomers miss entirely. The daggers don't affect gameplay in any significant way, making them purely optional detail for invested players. This type of inter-game reference rewards long-term series fans without punishing those coming to Elder Scrolls through Oblivion. It's fan service that doesn't require previous knowledge, enhancing appreciation for those who have context without gating content behind it.